Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
Today my guest is Patrick Fitzgibbons. He's a veteran police officer with approximately 20 years of experience in a variety of roles within law enforcement. Patrick holds an MBA in business and an MA in organizational leadership and is a lifelong learner. Now, he's a professor in higher education now and is dedicated to educating the next generation of law enforcement professionals. I want to welcome to the Susan Brender Show, Patrick Fitzgibbons.
How you doing, Susan? Thank you for allowing me to come on your show.
Well, it's my pleasure, Patrick. You know, there are a number of things that you do, and I'm going to just list them, okay? So one is that you're involved in leadership in criminal justice and law enforcement. The other is community policing. And then it goes on to say use of force issues, emotional and physical health in law enforcement, and issues facing law enforcement today. So let's talk a little bit about how you started, what inspired you, and how it's going.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. I started probably the path to law enforcement with it all goes back to my parents. I mean, mainly my father. He was a military officer, and I kind of took the path that he did and joined the military. Not right after high school. I kind of had a job. I joined later on when I was about 21, pretty old to join the military, but went the military route. Was in the United States Army down in North Carolina. And I knew when I was in the Army that I wanted to continue to serve. I knew I was going to make a career out of the military, but I started gearing towards law enforcement, and that's the route I took. I came back to Colorado, where I'm at right now, and got back into school and went to the police academy and ended up getting a job with the department, one department in northeastern Colorado, and now I'm on the Front Range with another department, and that's how I started my career in law enforcement, because I knew I wanted to serve and continue that service out of the military in the law enforcement role, like helping.
You know, Patrick, there are many police officers who get a bum rap, and sometimes they deserve it and sometimes not. But why do you think that there is such controversy over the way policemen are thought of?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the way the media paints law enforcement. You know, in the last handful of years, you know, law enforcement hasn't been painted, it hasn't been given, painted in a good light. And then some of that is, like you indicated, Susan, is deserved. Some of the mistakes are on us, and we deserve the criticism. And this is a job where we're constantly under the microscope. But I think a lot of it has to do with the media and, quite frankly, leaders in our government that, don't really give officers the benefit of the doubt. It's a very tough job, and again, we're used to being criticized, but I think officers get a bum rap because people listen to media, which in some cases are skewed one different way, and they're not educated in how officers and how law enforcement operate.
Yeah.
They get their information off movies and television and think that's how it is in real life.
Well, we're going to get into that in a second, but first, before we do that, I'd like to know about your ideas about gun control. We have, again, it's a controversial issue, and in the Trump administration, it really is brought up as one of the first things that people think about. So what's your thoughts about gun control?
Well, I mean, that's a broad question. I mean, are you talking about, more and more control over weapons and what type of weapons people have, or can you? Yeah,
well, let me say this. There are some people who think that the fact that people can get a hold of guns, and I'm talking about all kinds of guns, I'm talking about machine guns, AK-47s, that's a travesty. They think that having the ability to have a weapon and unfortunately, their children, are exposed to it, and they cause all kinds of crime. So the question is, what do you think? Do you think that people should be able to have weapons? Should they be able to have AK-47s and weapons of that nature?
Well, I don't know. My wife and I have this discussion routinely. I mean, first of all, we already have gun control in this country, so the notion that some people think that there is absolutely no gun control, that's simply a false narrative. There is a lot of gun control in this country, and we do. People have to go through background checks to get guns. Now, to answer your questions about, should people do people need, or, I don't think personally people need to have AK-47s. But again, the issue again is back to the Second Amendment and, the right to bear arms, and that's what people are going to fall back on. It's their constitutional right to have those weapons. I don't necessarily agree with it, but again, that is the current, that's the law of the land right now, and it's a hot topic. I don't think that people should have machine guns, but who am I? That's just my that is just my take on it. So, but there is gun control out there. People think that there's absolutely no gun control out there, and that's false. We do have laws that are out there that prohibit certain people from getting these type of weapons. But the real issue, Susan, and this is what I talk about with my wife, is say you ban guns tomorrow. Say just hypothetically. You ban weapons tomorrow. What are you going to do with the millions and millions and millions of weapons that are currently in the system?
Yeah,
are you going to go door to door? Are you going to go door to door and take weapons from people? So I agree with I don't think people need AKs and these powerful weapons. But again, that's currently if people can have them and they don't have some criminal record and they don't have mental issues or anything like that, they go and buy them.
Yeah. Don't you think it's easy for people to get guns if they want to cause crime? It's a lot of people again are in a situation where they purchase guns just for having fun, shooting targets, skeet shooting, that sort of thing. But the issue is really about the people who get guns to commit crimes, and I have had discussions with friends and people who say that it's a travesty to have guns, and offering guns, all kinds of guns, really does an injustice to our system. Now, a friend of mine, she and I talked about it, and she said, well, look at the other countries. Look at Australia. They took away the guns, and the crime has gone down. Is she accurate or not?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for Australia. I do know that, compared to other countries, look at the United States. It's a relatively newer country compared to European countries, and I don't know. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, Australia is Australia. The United States is the United States. I know, we are a heavily armed country, and that is our right. The Second Amendment. Second Amendment advocates are gonna say that. It's our right. Now, taking away guns, from law-abiding citizens, do you think the criminals are going to turn in their guns if there's a gun ban? Probably not. So what the argument to that, I think, the other side of that is, so if you have a gun ban, law-abiding citizens, Susan, like you and I and a lot of your listeners, are probably going to turn over their weapons. Do you think the criminals are going to do that? No. I mean, if a criminal comes into a no-gun zone, do you think they're going to turn around and say, well, we can't go in here because there's a sign that says it's a gun-free zone? So I think in some ways, the other argument to that is, if you disarm and you take away the guns from everybody in the United States, first of all, it wouldn't happen. I think it's an impossibility. But if it did, hypothetically, the criminals aren't going to turn in their guns.
You're right. Yeah. Well,
they don't care.
Yeah, of course they don't care, and that's why I'm bringing up the subject, because I want somebody who's in the system, like yourself, to really give people the accurate information, because there's, again, so much controversy over this, and there are people who are out there who try to tell everyone, let's take away the guns, they're causing damage. Well, you answered it the way I would answer it, and I want to say to my audience, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to, if you look at sort of look at 9/11, Susan. Was that committed with guns? No. Look at Oklahoma City bombing. Some of the worst terrorist acts in history. Fertilizer. Were those guns? No. So if people are really dead set on doing damage to and killing another person, they don't need a gun. There's a variety of issues, and when you really it's a slippery slope. So when you start banning certain things like AK-47s and assault rifles, I really do believe, and this is just my opinion, when you give the government an inch, they're going to take a mile. So if you take away assault rifles, who's to say they're not going to take away handguns?
Right.
Because it's a very slippery slope when it comes to this, this thing. And there's been plenty. I mean, assaults happens every day, and people unfortunately lose their lives over non-gun related crimes. Knifings, stabbings, other weapons that they use. So I think, blaming the gun is. I agree that there's too many guns out there right now, but I think people need to be educated more, about how to use weapons. And I'm glad people are, learning more about weapons when they go get if they get a concealed weapons permit, they have to go through a course, at least here in Colorado. So, I mean, it's a very hot issue, and I know, the first instinct is to take away the guns, but I don't necessarily think that is the right course of action. And of course, everybody has their own view, and I respect everybody else's view. That's
correct. Now, let's get into something else. So what are the hot button issues regarding law enforcement?
Oh, there's so many. I think, in the last, you probably know, Susan, and many of your listeners, we've law enforcement has been under the microscope in the last several years, and that's part of that goes along with the job of being a police officer. But I think, some of the hot button issues are use of force issues, like you indicated at the beginning of the show, when officers use force. I mean, there was a recent incident in Colorado in the last couple of days in Fort Collins, which is a couple hours away from where I'm at right now, where a Fort Collins police officer basically is seen on video. A bystander took a video of a police officer basically slamming this 22-year-old student to the ground, and arrested her. So I think issues like use of force, those are hot button issues, and we've all seen some controversial shootings in the last several years involving police. So I think those are hot button issues within law enforcement.
Yeah, and what about the incident on the United flight where a group of security officers pulled a man and damaged him a lot? Do you think that was? Do you think it was okay for them to do that, or was that a travesty?
Well, I think I think you got to look at kind of both sides of the story, and I don't know all the details, but I think it goes back to, and from what I understood, the reason why his face was kind of messed up is because they were trying to pull him off, and his face hit a headrest, and it looked horrible. This poor guy is screaming on the flight, but I think it, and I talked about this in a recent show I did where, why can't people I think we're living in an era now, Susan, and maybe it's always been that way, but why are more and more people just defying authority? Why are people just saying, no, I'm not going to do that?
Yeah.
And I think it is horrible when somebody gets bumped from a flight. I mean, I have, and I'm not happy, but for the story I read prior to this is, the guy was defiant. He was holding up the plane from leaving. He was cursing. He was just being belligerent. And they just didn't reach in and grab this guy without trying to talk to him. So I think the bigger picture for me is, why are we in this era now? And we can go to cite other examples where people are just saying, no, I'm not going to do what you're telling me to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting
and I think
point.
And I think that really, the guy on the plane, it's horrible to look at, but why didn't he just get off? Well, he's got to get back to his patients. He was a doctor. Okay, I get that.
Okay.
But why can't you get on the phone and say, to your secretary or whoever's managing your schedule and say, look, I'm going to be delayed, and tell my patients I'm going to be delayed.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like people want their 5 minutes of fame, and they're going to defy and not going to do what they're told to do. Okay. Right, wrong, or indifferent, if somebody tells you to do something in a position of authority, just do it.
Yeah. All right. So give us a scenario now, Patrick. A scenario of you're standing up on the stage and you have a large audience, and what do you want to say to them? Do you want to tell them that unfortunately we live in a time where people are just defying all kinds of, let's just say, they're defining the way law enforcement is treating people? Just give me a scenario of what you would tell them on the stage.
Well, the first thing I try to tell people, and I teach a lot, I train a lot of new officers, is the first, most every officer out there, and I can't speak for, I can just speak for the officers I know, and most officers out there would rather gain compliance than to use force. So it really starts with communication. We want to have a good relationship with the community, with the public as a whole, and it all starts with good communication. And, that has to start with us. So we try to do the best job of communicating our intentions, and hopefully, if we have good communication skills, we're able to establish that rapport and get compliance, especially when we're asking people to do things. So, I think if I was to give a couple, bullet points for the audience is, most officers want to work with you, and they just want to go home every night. We have families, we have, kids. Most of us, we want to go home. Everybody wants to go home. So let's just get along together. Mm-hmm. And again, we're humans, and we make mistakes, but I think we just live in this era right now where so many more people. Thankfully, most people, if an officer or somebody in authority says, "Hey, can you do this?" Most people do that, but it seems like we're seeing more and more of these videos coming out where people are just saying, "No, I'm not going to do what the cop tells me to do." Mm. And then that's when it escalates, unfortunately.
That's right. And what about the media? Are they doing an injustice to the police? There was a time, and I remember when everybody just would feel that the police are part of the community, and they want to protect them, and they want to create a situation where they feel very safe. But today, unfortunately, is it the media who's doing something that's an atrocity in terms of the way that they project or that they tell stories about the police? Because you see so many videos of people who are beating other police who are beating people up, who are pulling them off planes, who are doing so many different things that years ago they would have never done.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and that's a great question. I think, we need the media. The media is valuable, and we need the media in our society. And I have a good working relationship with local media here when something happens, and most officers in my department. But to answer your question, I think, there have been some incidents in recent years where I think the media has been extremely biased against the police department. Because, are you still there, Susan?
Yeah, I'm hearing. I'm listening to you.
Okay, yeah, I think that there's been, a couple incidents in recent years where the media, Michael Brown was a case that, unfortunately, this guy lost his life, but the media initially jumped on, the fact that the cops did something wrong without getting all the facts in. They just jumped to that conclusion. And so, again, I always tell people, Susan, I'm going to tell your audience, are there bad cops out there? You better believe it. There are some bad officers out there that shouldn't be wearing a badge, that are making bad decisions. But the overwhelming majority of officers out there, brave men and women, that put on that uniform every day, have families, they would just want to go home at night. No officer gets the uniform on and says, you know what, I'm going to go beat somebody up.
Yeah.
I'm going to go hurt somebody. I want to go use my gun today and shoot somebody. People who think that way are just ridiculous. No officer does that because you know what? They have families, they have houses, they have lives, and no officer wants to do that. So I think, back to your question about the media, I think in some cases the media is fair, but I think in a lot of cases they're just extremely biased because that's what sells.
Yeah.
And that's what gets ratings and things like that.
Yeah. Now, what challenges are facing law enforcement going forward?
Well, I think rebuilding the trust, that was lost, in recent years, like with, Michael Brown, Gray from, I can't believe it, I think it was Baltimore, some Freddie Gray from Baltimore. I think there's these large, big, high-profile cases that really threw law enforcement in the spotlight. And again, law enforcement's used to it, but I think trying to get over that and move forward and get those ties back and those relationships with the community. And a lot of that damage was done, Susan, by the media and other people that are spreading this false narrative about law enforcement like we're out there just shooting people every day. And that is absolutely not the case. And have there been incidents in recent years where officers have made horrible, stupid mistakes where people have lost their lives? Yes.
Yeah.
Those officers, in some cases, have been prosecuted. and they're in prison, and they need to be there. So, but I think overwhelmingly, officers are doing the right thing every day. Think about this, Susan, and to put this in perspective. Is
okay.
How many? I don't know if you or your listeners know how many contacts do law enforcement officers in the country worldwide have with citizens? I would say tens and tens of thousands, maybe even more than that. How many of those incidents result in a use of force? Very, very small percentage. So, I mean, the overwhelming majority of contacts citizens have with law enforcement on a daily basis are positive contacts.
Well, you're the person who has to give my audience an opportunity to understand what's going on in the police force today. It's very important that they understand both sides, okay, and that they learn to respect the police, because, as I said before, and as you said, there's a lack of respect and things have to change. Now, I always like to give my guest the last word. So if you were to tell people, my audience especially, what it is that you would like to see in the police force today and what moving forward is going to be the best thing that can ever happen in our country.
Well, I think we need to connect more, again, with the community. This isn't a time in this, and I kind of disagree where I think a lot of people out there support law enforcement. I just think that in some cases, they're just afraid to speak up. I mean, I think a lot of people out there support law enforcement. I think this is a time where law enforcement needs to be more engaged, with the community. We need to go out there and talk with people and try to have more meetings with the community and get to the root of the problem and try to allay some of that fear. A lot of it has to do with education too, Susan. And if the officers are out there, administration, like myself, we're out there talking to the community and listening to some of their concerns. I think that's and a lot of departments do that right now. I think we need to keep doing that. And to be quite honest, Susan, you're going to have a percentage of people who are just never going to like law enforcement, who just don't care. Whatever you tell them, whatever you say, it's just not going to be good enough. So, and we know that. So I think going forward is to still try to repair some of the damage that has been done in recent years with reputational law enforcement, just being active in the community. That is paramount. And, of going forward, because I think if you're active within the community, people are more apt to give the law enforcement information, when that trust is broken down and eroded to the point some communities it is, then the police officers have a much harder road to travel because they're not getting information. People don't trust the police. And in some cases, it might be justified where, maybe you have departments out there where there's high levels of use of force or, they just don't trust law enforcement, and it's unfortunate. Yeah. And that's a problem that we as law enforcement need to address. We need to get rid of those officers out there that don't need to be among our ranks. So.
Now, Patrick, if people want to talk to you, if they want to get a different impression of the police and what the police do, how do they reach you?
Well, I have a growing podcast I'm pretty proud of called CJ Evolution, which is Criminal Justice Evolution, and it's a podcast for criminal justice professionals. That's the main audience, but we're getting a lot of downloads from people who are not in criminal justice, people who just want to get a different view on law enforcement and criminal justice. And they can go to my website, cjevolution.net. You can find me on LinkedIn, my name, Pat Fitzgibbons. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, at Pat_Fitzgibbons. You can find me there. So, and I'd love to hear from your listeners. I'm very receptive. If you reach out to me, I'll definitely get back to you.
That sounds great. I can't help but asking one last thing, and that is that the different movies, the different shows on television, do they give you a picture that is accurate as well of the police?
No. I mean, that's law enforcement. That's Hollywood. That's that a lot of it is just make believe. I mean, there are some shows out there that are somewhat accurate. Like the First 48, I think, is a show about homicide detectives, and that's kind of accurate about what they're dealing with. But like CSI Miami, and there's so many. I don't even know how many CSIs are. I mean, a lot of that is just hype. It's just Hollywood, and they don't give a real accurate description of what law enforcement really is. As a matter of fact, really quick, Susan, there's a term out there called the CSI effect that is pretty prevalent among criminal justice, and basically that means that people, some people, not all people, but they watch what they see on television, and they really do think that is what goes on in real life, and it's called the CSI effect, and that's just from one show, obviously, and they really do think that is how it is in law enforcement. And the problem is when you get into juries, a lot of the people that watch television think how it's like, and on the movies and television think that that's how it is really like.
Yeah, right.
In real life, and it's not the case. And so, and then you get juries that people that really think this. Oh, I saw it on TV.
Yeah,
it makes it that much harder sometimes when trying to get together a jury.
Yeah, I understand. Well, today my guest has been Patrick Fitzgibbons, and he's the creator and host of CJ Evolution podcast, covering a wide variety of criminal justice issues, and it can be found on iTunes, on Podbean, and various other platforms. So thank you so much, Patrick, for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's been a real pleasure, and I think you've educated some of my audience, and that's what we stand for. It's information and education. So thank you again, Patrick, for being on my show.
Well, Susan, thank you again for allowing me to come on your show. And again, if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out to me, I'll be more than happy to talk to them.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.